Right. As we did this morning, we'll have another witness, and then we'll open for questions, and then we'll have our last witness and ask questions instead of having three together. Joshua Blackman, I introduced him as the Centennial Chair of Constitutional Law at South Texas School of Law. Joshua.
Thank you so much. Chairman Patrick, Vice Chair Carson, it's an honor to be here today. And a point of privilege, I'm Jewish, Rabbi Soloveitchik is Jewish. There are many religions represented in this committee. I think that's a beautiful testament to the pluralism of our country. So thank you very much for making such a wonderful board. And also, if we keep our brothers and sisters in Israel in our prayers today, they're under attack at the moment. I have 10 minutes. You'll get 10 cases. So it's going to be very fast. But we will make this spin. The story begins in 1947. The case we've mentioned before, Everson versus Board of Education. This involves something benign, school buses. My kids take the school bus all the time. So in New Jersey, the school districts had buses that took kids to Catholic schools on public buses. An Establishment Clause challenge was brought, saying that this was unconstitutional. Now, the court upheld taking kids to the Catholic schools on the buses. But Justice Hugo Black, former U.S. Senator, said, aha, but we know the real meaning of the Constitution. It is not James Madison, as Stephanie said, it's Thomas Jefferson with this metaphor of a separation of church and state. And he said, this is what it means. No other evidence, nothing to say that's the real meaning. That's what it meant. And he says that this wall must be kept high and impregnable. It can't be breached. Not even the slightest breach be tolerated. So Black laid down the blueprints that the Establishment Clause means separation of church and state. We discussed this morning. That is not what the Constitution says. Not even close, my friends. So then about 15 years later, we get to a case mentioned earlier, the school prayer case, Engel against Vitale, 1962. My mom was actually a public school student in New York at the time. She actually remembers this. Schools began their day with the Pledge of Allegiance, which under Gobitis and Barnett you cannot say. But after, there was a voluntary prayer, which, as I said before, was pretty, frankly, bland. Thank you, God, we're here. Thank you for the country, and so on. Nothing particularly egregious in any definition. Yet by a 6-to-1 vote, 6-to-1 wasn't even close. The court held that this was unconstitutional. Justice Black for the majority. Justice Potter Stewart wrote the lone dissent. And Justice Black says, we've breached this wall, this separation of church and state. There have been prayers in schools for generations. But suddenly, in 1962, all of a sudden, this wall was resurrected. Poor choice of words, perhaps in the Bible Museum. But the wall came back. And he said, this wall has been breached. Justice Stewart dissented. He said, this is not in the Constitution. You're making this up. Stop it. But that was the law. Justice Black wrote, when the Constitution was adopted, there was an awareness about the dangers of the union, church, and state. And the Justice Stewart said, what are you talking about? Go a few blocks that way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Every day it begins, God save the United States and its honorable court. Every day. The House and Senate, a couple blocks that way. Every day there's a prayer from a chaplain. As Stephanie said, the very first Congress that passed the First Amendment paid for the chaplains in Congress. Every president, when they take the oath, say, so help me God. They ask for protection of God. George Washington on down. Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. In God we trust in every piece of currency. Right? There is history here that the Supreme Court just looked away at. This was the Warren Court. They were making stuff about criminal procedure, about rights of privacy, penumbras, but God forbid the thing is actually in the Constitution. We're just going to push that aside. Then we get to 1971. This was a dark year for religious freedom. Roe came about 2 years later, so this is a dismal time for the court. The court decides a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. That was an appropriate name for a case. This was it. This case gave a so-called Lemon test. Again, it involved funding of religious schools. And the court puts forward this three-part test, which they just made up of whole cloth. This didn't come from anything. They said, here's the test to decide. They loved tests back then in the 70s. Here's the test to decide. So first, the law must have a purpose that is not religious. If there's a religious purpose, you can't do it. We discussed this morning, almost all of our laws have some basis in morality. This can't be the test. Number two, if a law advances religion, you can't have that. This is consistent with 2 centuries of precedent. And third, this is my favorite one, you can't have an excessive entanglement, whatever that means, an excessive entanglement with church and state. So even if, the government had to sort of monitor a school to make sure they're spending the money properly, oh, that's an entanglement. You can't have this. And what's fascinating is this was a test designed to protect religion. If you actually read the briefing, it said, we want to separate church and state to protect the religious because we want to protect people of faith from the government. If government gets into their hands, they'll corrupt the church. We don't want them. We are helping you. We're helping you. If you want the money, you can't have it. We're helping you. This was paternalism at its worst. Lemon created a 5-decade reign of terror for the religion clauses. Justice Scalia, Jerry Bradley, the great line, this ghoul that creeps in the night and comes to haunt our nightmares, right? This is how Justice Scalia described the Lemon test. So a couple of decisions that spawned from this. One, you have Stone against Graham. This was about whether you could post the 10 Commandments on the wall. Now, I'm in Texas. Governor Patrick's here. We passed a statute this year saying that the 10 Commandments we posted, we'll see what happens there. Another case called Wallace against Jaffrey, 1985, says you can't have a moment of silence in school. Forget you have to pray, just a moment of silence. They said that will be too coercive. And then in 1992, a case called Lee versus Weissman. This was, again, not about Christian nationalism, whatever you might think. It was about a rabbi in Rhode Island who wanted to give the most ecumenical prayer ever, and a student, Deborah Weissman, objected, saying that I feel coerced. By the way, she was Jewish. So they brought a rabbi to give a speech, and Jewish objected, but she felt coerced by even having this present in her graduation. And the court said, no, we can't have this. Adolescents are susceptible to peer pressure, right? And even being around, aware of a prayer is too much, and the risk of indirect coercion is unconstitutional. Okay, so those are the bad old days. We'll get now to the better times, the current times, the things that actually are in the upswing. So again, 2014, Town of Greece versus Galloway. This is not from ancient Greece, this is from upstate New York. The town council there began their sessions with a prayer. And they had a practice where they would go through the phone book. For children, there's a book that phone number is in it, right? They go through the phone book, and they would find all the numbers of parishioners in the area. And they would invite them to give an opening prayer. This case split 5-4. Justice Kennedy had the majority, and he said, this is okay. There's a long history of prayer going back to the time of the framing. No one's being forced to say the prayer. If you don't want to say it, you can just leave the room. And this is not a violation of the religion clauses. Justice Kagan dissented, and she objected, saying, you know what, I don't mind prayer. I just don't like these prayers. Why? Because they had the word Jesus, right? And they spoke of the Holy Spirit and things like this. We need just, she said, prayers are acceptable to everyone. This is the solemnity point made earlier, right? Just prayers that speak to no religion is the only religion you can have. That's not a prayer. I don't know what that is. It's just like a pep talk. I don't know, right? What is that? So I think the court saw past that. But even Justice Kennedy said we can't have people coerced. I'm with you. I think it's a good test. Then we get to the trilogy. I think Professor said earlier, the trilogy of cases. So 2017, Trinity Lutheran versus Comer. 2020, Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, and 2022, Carson against Macon. Boom, boom, boom. The court cited 3 cases over the course of 5 years that changed the law a lot. In the past, any funding of religion was basically unconstitutional. You just couldn't do it. So now the court's saying, wait a minute, if you're giving money to non-religious groups, you can't discriminate against religious groups. Those are good rules. But my goodness, we saw during COVID, casinos open, churches closed. So if we just apply this principle evenly, I think we're in a good place. Someone asked recommendations earlier. If we just treat religion the same as everything else, we'd be a lot better off. Don't treat a liquor store or marijuana dispensary better than a synagogue. That's a bad look. But we get to 2022 where things actually kind of right. My good friend Stephanie mentioned this earlier. Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. Kelly's group helped litigate this case for a number of years. This was a football coach. Coach Kennedy, you've probably seen him on TV, he gets around. They're good at that media stuff, right? He would give a prayer at the 50-yard line after the game. No one's required to say it to him. They sit down and pray, take a knee, whatever, and they can join if they want. The school said, we're afraid of getting sued, so you have to stop praying. That was actually the fear, right? They were afraid of the Lemon test. Because of the Lemon, they said you cannot pray. This case goes up and down the courts, finally gets to the court in 2022, and miraculously, Lemon was buried, Mazel tov, it's gone, no more. The court said the test now is based on history and tradition, and in particular, is there coercion? Not just, peer pressure, actual coercion, right? Are you forcing someone to pray? No. So this is the rule we have now. I think the court's still sort of figuring out where Lemon goes. Does it go here? Does it go there? But that's a 50-year summary of the cases. I think if there's just one thought I can leave you with, it's this notion that merely being exposed to prayer, merely being exposed to a religious symbol like a Ten Commandments display or something like that, that is not enough to trigger the Establishment Clause, right? And if we start from there, almost all the other cases of the Ten Commandments displays and this and that, moment of silence, those cases go away. So will the court overrule Engel v. Vitale? I don't know, right? That's on the chopping block. We have in Texas a bill that just got passed this past session. But I think it's a sort of bold moment. There's a lot of change ahead, and I think this commission meeting at just the right time to give guidance to the government of how to deal with this new reality. So thank you so much. Thank you to Stephanie, thank you to Kristen, the commission, and I welcome your questions later.